I can't possibly stand at that podium. I need to move around. So Angelo's going to earn his money here following me to the camera. I'm here to talk to you tonight about, if you haven't heard, what is called Alice. No, Alice is not our new super security guard, although Alice, my home auditor, does a wonderful job. Alice, as is many things in education, is an acronym. And Alice stands for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evacuate. For years, our standard procedures, anytime there's some sort of emergency event, critical event, and again, without getting into details, we all know what those are. Our traditional procedure has been what has just been known as traditional lockdown. If you've heard the kids talk about it, whenever we did one of those lockdown drills, what would typically happen was somebody would get on the PA, announce that there's a lockdown. Historically, sometimes there were codes involved, code red, or code red drill. What would happen at that point is the staff would know, okay, that their job was to make sure that their door was locked, their room was secure, okay? Possibly do a quick scan outside the room to make sure there are no kids in the immediate vicinity. If there were, to get them in. Make sure that they're in and safe, make sure that room is secure at that point, shut off the lights, and get the kids to a corner of the room that is out of any sight lines. Many of our rooms have windows into doors and windows next to the doors. So the idea is to get the kids into a corner, the room is dark, they're out of sight, hopefully out of harm's way. Unfortunately, what we've learned from history over the last 10 years is that that isn't always the case, that that doesn't work. So the ALICE program was in response to that. So talk a little bit about it. Kids sitting in that classroom. Obviously, our main priority are some of the things you're going to hear about later tonight, the curriculum. We want your kids to leave here with an outstanding education. That is our goal. Okay? However, I'm also here to stand in front of you to say that if we don't keep your kids safe, all of those great curriculum things that we do, we're missing the boat. So we have a huge responsibility. You entrust your children to us, so it's our responsibility to make sure that they're safe. So how do we do that? I talked a little bit about what a traditional lockdown looks like. It evolved because as educators, our main priority has been accountability. So in a traditional lockdown, those kids are accounted for. We know where they're at, they're in that room, they're secure. Whenever the all clear comes around, as a classroom teacher, I can confidently tell a first responder that yes, all my kids were here, they're all accounted for. Okay? So there's a certain amount of control and convenience associated with it. Unfortunately, the downside is that that control and convenience also exists for the intruder, for the bad guy. The kids are in that room, the kids are stuck in there. So how do those events usually end? Generally they end before the police gets there, but you're counting on a police response at that point. The traditional lockdown operates under the assumption that the police are going to come and, God bless them, save the day. History tells us again, though, that that isn't always the case, that most of those events end before the police actually enter the building. And this kind of shows you there. The blue line, the shooter resolved incidents, the shooter resolves it, usually ends their own life. The far left column, the second highest one, is victim resolve. So that the victims, okay, again, not always schools, okay, but wherever that incident's occurring, they resolve it. And you'll see the line in the middle, the blue line, that's the smallest, are the ones that the police have resolved. So again, I mentioned to you what ALICE stands for. It's alert, lockdown, inform, counter, and evacuate. Again, what it is not, it's not a step-by-step what they call or consider a linear procedure. You know, if you were to ask me, you know, give me the 5 steps of ALICE. Well, I can tell you what ALICE entails, but I can't tell you the 5 steps. Because one of the beauties of the ALICE ideology is that it's not a canned program. It's not a one-size-fits-all. The response that that classroom teacher and that classroom at large, including the kids, has to an event largely depends on that eye that we see in the middle, the information that they receive. So the first thing that happens is an alert goes out. Okay? Some sort of alert announcing the event. The presence of either an active shooter or an intruder in the building, and that could happen a number of different ways. The loudspeaker, phone, personal observation, somebody yells something, or unfortunately you hear, some gunshots or something of that nature that announces that presence. So, as I mentioned, part of the importance of this is that information. So it's key to making the decisions. We can't make an informed decision until that information is out there. So if you remember when I mentioned historically when a lockdown would take place, usually the information was minimal to almost zero. As I said back in the day of codes, unless you were privy to what those codes meant, you might not even know what a code red means. Code red generally sounds bad, but do you truly know what code red is putting into motion? So again, the idea behind the ALICE program, or the ALICE ideology, so to speak, is that you put all that information out on the table. You announce what is occurring, what actually is the event, where is that person located? Because, again, as I say, your response is going to some extent, be decided by that information that you receive. So, the idea of the lockdown itself, the L in ALICE, you're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Okay? Lockdown has its place. ALICE takes things a step further, though, and there's this idea of an enhanced lockdown, if you will. So some of the things that I talked about are still up there. Classrooms are still locked. But that third bullet down where it says barricade, the idea now is that, oh, there it is. Most of the pictures in there, okay? We have all kinds of stuff in our rooms, okay? So historically, as I told you, we would take the kids, we would put them in a corner of the room, get them out of a sight line, okay, which is all good stuff. But we've also got 25 to 30 desks in that room, a couple filing cabinets, some chairs, all kinds of good stuff. And again, I hate to even talk about some of this stuff because it's not pleasant to talk about. But that lock isn't bulletproof. So if the only thing keeping the bad guy out of that room is a door lock, especially if there's a glass window right next to that door lock, and they want in that room, unfortunately that door lock's not going to keep them out. But if I stack 25 desks and chairs and a filing cabinet up against that door, they're probably going to move on. Okay? Because, again, as uncomfortable as some of these things are to talk about and think about, they're there to get in and out. They're there to move quickly. They're not going to spend 5 minutes trying to get that door open. They're not going to spend time trying to get into that room if they have to work for it. So it becomes a deterrent. So the idea behind ALICE is that you're going to make it as difficult as possible for that person to even gain access to the room. You're still getting out of sight lines. You're still getting out of the way, okay? But you're going to take a minute or two to do that. So as I said, you lock the door from the inside. You're still turning off the lights. You're blocking the door, getting away from the door, getting out of the sight line, get behind something if you can. Okay? Here's some other ideas that they have. Just some innocent little things that we might not even think about that you can use to hold the door closed. You'll see that's a typical arm that you'll see on a lot of the doors around the school. If you put a belt around those, I don't care how big you are, you're not getting that door open. It's pretty amazing. The second one there, again, the typical double doors that you might see in our hallway, just tied shut with a computer cable by the looks of it. In the bottom one, there's a room where they may or may not have had 30 desks. Who knows what the story behind that is, but they took a table, tied something to it, and again, short of that not coming out, that door's not coming open. The inform we talked about a little bit. That message can come in a number of ways, the PA system, perhaps a text message, emails go out, however that information gets out there. The other thing that they like to point out too is that these announcements might be going on. This intruder, this person in your building, they're already in some likely sort of agitated state. So if they keep hearing these announcements announcing where they're at all the time, they're now in the science hall, they're now in the math hall, they're headed to the second floor, there's a certain unnerving nature to that. And again, anything to disrupt that person. They may hear that announcement and change directions. Well, again, you've just delayed them, and any delay that we can create here within the building, all the while, the first responders are on their way. The next part of Alice is the E for evacuate. If I was to announce that there was an intruder in our main office, well, we have classrooms in the back of the building right next to doors. And I'm going to be the first to tell you that it would be silly for me to expect those teachers and those kids to, quote unquote, as we say, hunker down, when all they have to do is go out the door. So that's, again, that's a change in philosophy from traditional lockdown. A lot of this, again, has come out of, unfortunately, events that have happened in the past. So we've learned that if people have the opportunity to get out, get out. What's important here for us is there does still need to be a certain level, obviously, of accountability. That responsibility that we have to your kids. Okay? So part of what we have to teach the kids, obviously, is this isn't a mad rush out of the building, every man for himself type of thing. Okay? We want you to mad rush out of the building, but the kids will have in their mind predetermined locations that we'll call rally points. Okay? This is where you go when we evacuate. Because as you're rushing out of the building, I can't be standing there taking attendance as these kids go running by, obviously. Okay, we're just trying to get out of the building. Okay? So we know that these are the points that you go to. For those of you that may have heard some of the news about the Franklin Regional stabbing event, that happened at one of the most difficult times for schools. We like to keep things neat. We do our fire drills at certain times to keep them neat. We have to get to the point where you do it during some of those messy times. Well, the stabbing happened at arrival, okay, which kids are coming and going. They're in their lockers. They haven't checked into homeroom yet. They don't really even know who's there. But the kids knew to go to the stadium. So as they rushed out of the building in what may have looked like a chaotic scene to somebody else, those kids gathered in the stadium, by and large. So they were able to be accountable for those kids because they knew where to go. So that's the important part of the evacuation. And it's interesting too because, one of the points behind this is that whether we plan for it or not, the evacuation in a lot of cases happens anyway. It's a natural response. So that's the planning part. The last piece to Alice, and it's a little out of order if you're following kind of along with the acronym, is this idea of counter. Okay? And this is probably the most difficult part to talk about. The idea of locking yourself and barricading in a room, okay, we can do. The idea of getting the heck out, let's evacuate the building, well, that makes sense. I'm sure, if there was an emergency in your house, okay, you all hopefully have plans for getting out of your house. Okay? So again, we can wrap our minds around this idea of evacuating. This is the tough one. This is the idea that we've barricaded the room, we've locked the door, we've thrown desks in front of that door, and now the unthinkable's happened. Okay? I have to make a choice. Do I sit here or do I react? Do I count persons in the room? So, sometimes you hear the conversation about these types of programs that you're teaching kids to take on armed gunmen. You're teaching kids to take on the intruder. Yes and no. Okay? That is the absolute positive last response. That's your life and death choice. That's why this is the most difficult part of this conversation to have with you as parents and certainly with kids. Unfortunately, our reality, and I could go through the statistics if you wanted to, is that if we ignore that reality, we're only hurting ourselves. So the idea is now we've done everything we possibly can, but unfortunately we're faced with that decision. So if you think about when you had, hopefully, remember those little kids, they're big teenagers now, but you remember them when they were this big. Okay, and you had that talk with them, you said, stranger danger. Billy, here's what I want you to do. God forbid, you're out at the mall and I turn around and you wander off because you see that balloon that you really want. And somebody grabs you by the arm. And you teach kids about stranger danger. What do you teach them to do? You don't teach them to go live. You don't don't teach them to give in. You teach them to bite, kick, scratch, spit, claw. You do scream, yell, do whatever you possibly can to get away from that person. We do self-defense classes all the time. Okay? Similar idea here. It's a change in a mindset from being a passive, unfortunate victim, okay, to being more active, to defending yourself. And that might mean throwing books, throwing whatever you can grab. That might be grabbing an aerosol can. That might be whatever you can do, because this is it. Okay? This is that last decision that you have to make before the unthinkable happens. Okay? So this is the most difficult part of talking about this. Some of the things that kids can do, teachers can do, whoever can do, we talked about. You create chaos, you sell, yell, scream, you disorient the person. Throw things, sprays, you move around, okay? Divert their attention, and if you have to, the idea of swarming, this rush, this idea of rushing. I could get into some really unpleasant and morbid statistics. I deleted most of them out of this presentation, to be honest with you. But if you look at what has happened during these events, and you compare them to what professional first responders, police, the military, trained marksmen, the kill rate, the percentage of shots to fatal injuries is through the roof, even compared to professionals. And because the difficulty level is pretty much zero, because for years the traditional lockdown taught sit there. So the idea of just creating chaos, just creating motion, just not being an easy target is where that comes in. I talked a little bit about that, the idea of stranger danger and self-defense. So again, what this is about providing options. It's not a pre-canned step 1, step 2, step 3. You, with that information, the teacher and the class decides what option it is for them. Do they need to lock down, or can they evacuate? And it empowers them. It empowers people to save their own life and the life of the kids. And this is endorsed, Homeland Security, the Pennsylvania State Police, the National Association of Chiefs of Police, were some of the organizations that were behind this. And this was kind of a quote that they threw in there that we always thought was kind of neat. Any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing is the wrong thing. The worst thing you can do is nothing. So we just thought that was appropriate. And we're going to do questions at the end, correct? At the end, okay. All right, well, and I thank you.